Hey everybody, before we get started with today's episode, I just wanted to let you know that if you didn't know, did you know that you could save 20% off your purchase from Arcadia Publishing? That's right, you can use checkout code Haunted Vermont and get 20% off your entire order. Otherwise, you can use our special link, arcadiapublishing.com/Haunted Vermont and purchase through there. Any way will help support not only Arcadia Publishing, but it will also support us here at Haunted Vermont. Now, enjoy the program. Welcome everybody to another episode of the Haunted Vermont podcast. My name is Paul Dolsky, and joining us this evening is another fascinating ghoul or ghostly, I should say. I'm trying to figure out how I said it last time with a cool person that like this. I think it was like Ghost Chris. Maybe that might be the appropriate term, especially for what she does in the New Hampshire realm of that section. But we're also here to talk about her work that she has done for Arcadia Publishing for the Vermont Book of the Dead and everything else that she would like to share. So, anyway, without further ado, and I apologize right now if I already screw up her last name because of the pronunciation for myself. But please welcome Roxie Zwicker.
You got it correct. You were so worried. You totally nailed it. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Roxy, for your time. And good. I'm glad I got the last name again. Like I said, with being part deaf, the pronunciation with some words and just the way some words look, it can be hard for us half deaf people. So, so thank you.
No worries.
So, Roxy, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, how did you kind of get yourself into the realm of the unknown and the strange to then, just real quick too, but you also run something in New Hampshire per se. You can get into it more, but it's like New England curiosities and stuff like that. So, yeah. So, how would you describe yourself?
Well, I guess the very quick story is I grew up in Western Massachusetts in the Pioneer Valley, and I was always that kid on the field trip that was raising their hand as we were getting ready to leave a space and ask if it was haunted. I found myself exploring a lot of the burial grounds out there. I was always also very intrigued as to why it was called the Pioneer Valley and why my high school was called Frontier Regional, because I had always thought that, the frontier and the pioneers were out west, like California and Oregon. And then I realized how important historically the area was. And a lot of that I learned, again, on field trips, by talking to people, by going into burial grounds and reading the gravestones and just finding them absolutely fascinating. So as time went on in my very early 20s, it seems like it's 1,000 years ago now, I took a part-time job over in an area known as Carver, Massachusetts, which is just next to Plymouth. And it was really just for fun. It was a part-time job telling ghost stories on a haunted hayride through the cranberry bog. Something that I was absolutely delighted to do, and it was even better that I was getting paid for it. And it was the best job interview ever when somebody asked, all right, so can you come out into this barn and scream as loud as you can? And nobody's ever asked me that question again on a job interview. So I did that job for a number of years. Unfortunately, the job came to an end because the property was taken by eminent domain, but I truly loved the job. And I also started to notice that people were sharing ghost stories and we were having a few of our own experiences. Now we'll fast forward up to about the year 2000, when we left Massachusetts and I came up here to the beautiful New Hampshire seacoast. And it was just kind of strange how it all started up again. I was on the board of directors for our local lighthouse, and I started to notice that the Coast Guard who were on base and visitors to the lighthouse were talking about having experiences. It's a very, very old location. The fort that is next to the lighthouse goes back to 1630. So I was quite intrigued and proposed that maybe I might look into doing some ghost tours that would benefit the lighthouse. And once again, after jumping through a few hoops, getting things all organized, the first few ghost walks that I did as a benefit for the lighthouse sold out immediately. And what the real icing on the cake was, people would line up after the walks and say, have you visited this place? Do you know about this house? My grandma told me a story about this cemetery over here. So before I knew it, I had started my own company, New England Curiosities, which officially were located in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, although I go over, from Portsmouth to Newcastle to Hampton. I'm all over the seacoast, and I'm also all over New England. I go everywhere and do talks and talk to people, and it's really been an incredible adventure. I had the opportunity to write some books. My first book came out through Arcadia in 2006, which was Haunted Portsmouth. I've now authored 10 books on New England ghost stories and folklore. I'm working on my 11th right now, and there's no shortage of amazing places to explore, stories, experiences to have, and it's just been a real joy to be able to do this and to take the plunge eventually and do this full time. And my Vermont Book of the Dead came out in 2023, and it's all about the haunted graveyards and mysterious burials and mysteries in the beautiful state of Vermont. And I've been going to Vermont as a kid and always just loved it and intrigued by the history and the architecture, and I think most of all the people.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, I mean, I picked up your book originally at the library because I was just curious because it kind of came on my radar about it being out, and I just happened to scroll through it, and I was just like, oh man, this is interesting. But of course, it being a library, I had to return it, so I didn't really have that much time to really go through it because like you and I were kind of talking off the air, like when it comes to life, we kind of get busy and then we kind of scramble around to make everything work. But anyway, the point to this is, so, thanks to the lovely people of like Arcadia, I requested the book to review, and I must say, like by the time I was done going through it, Roxy, I kind of think like your Vermont Book of the Dead, or even any of your Book of the Dead, because I know you have done more, is that it should be known as like a travel guide to like important landmark, or should I say, important like grave to, in this case, tell their stories and why it's either unique or what the symbolism behind it and everything else.
Well, thanks, and I really appreciate that, and I appreciate the extra effort that you went through to obtain a copy from the publisher. It definitely was a book that I had to do, and I had to do it right. And I think my outlook just as an author draws on my experience of just being a tour guide, because I write the stories. I select really carefully the places I want to talk about. I try to do a lot of the off the beaten path places. And I want it to be like, we're sitting together in the car or we're walking together through the burying grounds. And I won't write about a place that I haven't visited, because I find particularly with cemeteries, there's a lot of nuances that you might not realize without walking through the burial ground. And I think probably one of the best examples that I have of that is in talking about the very small cemetery that's located in Sandgate, Vermont. And it wasn't one that was on my radar. We just happened to be staying in Sandgate, and the folks that had the inn had told us that there was a little cemetery down the road. And I'm like, okay, great. And just the sensory experience of walking through this graveyard with all of the nature around us was like overwhelming. There was, snakes that were wrapped around the bases of the gravestones. There was a red-tailed hawk like immediately overhead. And the cemetery was on a dead-end road. Nobody drove by. The grass was tall. The wind was blowing, and I was like, "Wow, this is a complete experience that I have to include when I write about this cemetery." So I think when you're saying there's sort of that sense of it being a travel guide. I think that sort of just again comes out of I want it to with every page turn that you do to be an experience, like you can see it, you can visualize it. And I think in that sense, maybe it opens people up to imagine what it's like to be there, and then maybe even to go there themselves.
Right. Yeah, I'll touch on that for a minute as well. You also went to a place called like the Rockingham Meeting House Cemetery, which I've sort of been there a long time ago, just because of the receiving tomb that's literally right off the side of the the trek of the street, really, and right before you go up to where the meeting house is and stuff like that. But uh, one of the pictures I believe that you took was the empty bed sculpture that is meant to appear like it once held a sleeping child who was just called away. Which once I saw that, I said, I need to go see this for myself. I need to go find this. I want to find this. And yeah, so one day it was very nice. I literally got out of work and I was just like, you know what, this is the perfect time to go. It's only an hour away from where I am. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go and enjoy the ride and just enjoy it really. And as soon as I got there, it was just like, wow, like I do remember seeing the door, but I don't remember why I was only there for, let's just say 30 seconds for this story here of why I didn't stay long to try to, look at it more. But maybe because I was like on a job or something, or just didn't have the time. Maybe I was on a time restraint in a way. But anyway, the point to this is, so I had no idea where this empty bed sculpture is or anything. And when I stumbled upon it, I was just like, oh my God, here it is. I was like, yeah, that is kind of eerie at the same time. And I kind of told myself, like, as much as I appreciate this type of sculpture for a grave, it kind of reminds me of something you would see at like Hope Cemetery in Barre. And anyway, I was just like, what, thinking to myself, like, you don't really see these type of unique gravestones that much anymore, or even some of the old like memento mores and the other type of old symbolism anymore.
Yeah, it's really interesting how there's been an evolution in just gravestone imagery itself. And I've always found that very fascinating too, because once again, this is a reflection on beliefs of the time, what was going on in communities of the time. And, if I was to pick, probably one of the top 10 graveyards that I feel has a lot that it can teach you, it would definitely be the Rockingham Meeting House, because you do have some of those older 18th century stones. There's not a lot, there are some, and then there's a great variety of 19th century stones there, and you can see the beliefs change. And for anybody that has heard the term memento mori, that's Latin for remember death. And graveyards weren't just places to bury the dead, but they would help teach lessons about death and also about life. Were you going to church? Were you following the teachings of the community at the time? Because death was around every corner. Life expectancy was so much shorter. You had, women who were dying in childbirth. You had a high infant and child mortality rate. And when you look at some of these gravestones, whether they have the frowning faces, of which there are a lot of frowning faces at the Rockingham Meeting House Cemetery, or you're looking at some of the skulls on there, you can't help but walk by and ponder your own existence on Earth. But then if you take it at, a very interesting level of looking at a cemetery or graveyard or burial ground as a museum, there is something to be said for a gravestone that's been standing against 200, sometimes for 50, 300 years of New England winters, and you can still see the hand chiseled letters that spell out memento mori, or you can see the closed eyes carved on a face for someone that has passed. And if that isn't moving you, if that isn't connecting you to history, it really just illustrates, literally and figuratively, it literally illustrates so much. And you can learn about different carving styles in any burying ground. And I know you mentioned Barre. I mean, Barre is, that's another incredible cemetery in Vermont. And if you have not gone, you have to go. For any of the listeners that are out there, it is totally worth the trip. But you're also learning about the people that carved these stones. At the Rockingham burial ground, a lot of the carvers there, they came up from Massachusetts and brought their own sort of style of carving. There's a sort of a whole, I want to say, trying to find the word here. There's like a whole school of style of carving that's known as the Rockingham School of Carving, which is in that very specific style. But when you go over to Barre and you look at these incredible works of art that are monuments for the deceased, a lot of those stone carvers were from Italy, and unfortunately, their carvings were really their death, because there was no protection for the carvers, and they would breathe in the dust from all of the stonework, and they came down with something that was this awful lung disease, and it really put them in the grave, the stones that they were carving. So there's so many fascinating levels to the carvings and the people that carved them, and every stone is not only connected to the person that it represents in the ground, but also the person that carved it as well, and their sentiments and beliefs that are on it.
That's a good way of looking at that. And the way that you kind of were mention it too, like almost like a museum. I don't think I've ever thought of it that way, which is interesting that how you worded it in that sort of sense of like just walking into a museum and here they are on display kind of thing, which is true. And yeah, what a fascinating way that you just said that. Like, I don't know where I'm trying to go with this, but I guess I'm just like, I don't think that term I've ever heard anybody really speak of it in that sense. So but I do agree though, like when you do walk into a cemetery or a graveyard or even what I would call like forgotten burial ground because of some weird other places that I've seen graves, and that just kind of seemed out of place. Like when you were talking about, there's one that you were mentioning about on a dead end road, like when it's nature and stuff like that. Like, I mean, it's kind of like, well, how long has it been there, and when was the last time anybody really took care of it per se? If that's a good way of saying it like that, but yeah, I mean, some of these places though, like when I remember when the first time I went to Hope Cemetery, and I didn't realize all the phenomenal, unique graves. I only know about the one that people like to talk about, but other than that, like you don't really get to see a whole lot of the other ones that are there that should also be mentioned as well. And same with like Rockingham. I know like there was a few that you put in the book, but I mean, I was stumbling across a few more there that I was just like, oh wow, this is different too.
Yeah, and that's the great thing. And if you're going to go to a cemetery or burial ground, with an intent of seeing a few of the more notable or more talked about stones, definitely give yourself some time to explore. I know certainly, if you're going over to Barre, that's a day trip. It's just a huge cemetery in its own right. However, you'll find that there are graves that are tucked in all over the place there. There's different memorials. You can really get a sense of the community that's there. And then again, with the Rockingham Cemetery, I had to go there quite a few times to really comb through all of the stones that were there, and the folks that take care of the meeting house were very, very kind to me, and made sure that I knew about the ones that were important to them. They were also extremely generous with their time and let me take a look at the old hearse that is in the hearse house there. It dates back to the 19th century, which was just absolutely incredible to see that it was still there with the fabric and the tassels. And it's just in a little nondescript building that is right next to the cemetery. So there are a lot of unexpected things, aside, we haven't even touched on ghost stories or any of that, just the cemetery itself. That you can discover walking around and going beyond just what maybe one cemetery is famous for. And you'll find all these stories out there that, and like you said, people may have not been taking care of, a cemetery here or there. You could be the first person in, 50, 60, 70, 100 years to stand there and read the inscription on the stone. And to me, that's calling back history, that's remembering that person. And for that moment, they're not forgotten. While, the condition of the cemetery may vary, as they all do. There's something that is just so touching about that.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. A couple things I'll mention that kind of bring up a cool way of looking at it too in a different perspective is like the way you just said it. Who knows how long somebody's been to visit and stuff. So um, a couple years ago, Roxy, me and a friend went to Dummerston, Vermont, because I wanted to try to find the graves for the Spalding family, known as the vampire legend there in Dummerston, and
Mm-hmm.
and I knew about one of the family members. I think it was Captain Spalding. He was the only member that was in a different cemetery than where the rest of the family was because of the heavy rain. I think is what happened. Why he wasn't able to be buried with the rest of his family, or something like that. I think that's what it was. Anyway, the point to this is, so after we had found Captain Spaulding, we didn't stop there. We looked around the rest of the little cemetery there, and there was one stone that was very tall that was in the way back, almost like hidden behind like some trees or something. But you could tell this one had seen better days for the stone because it was just so mossy and dirty and just old, basically, like to the point where it just stopped being taken care of, so it was unreadable, basically. Anyway, so we ended up going there, went to the other cemetery, found the rest of the family there, and then after all was said and done, and I went back home, I started to edit the video together and etc. But later on that night when I went to sleep, I can't even make this up, but uh, like around 3 o'clock in the morning, my bedroom light flicked on by itself. And of course, I'm just like, oh boy, here we go. But like, I was just like, hey, I acknowledge you're here and all, but I'm trying to sleep if that's okay. And just turned the light off, and that was it. But what I just want to state for the record here is my bedroom light is not just like a light switch. It was one of those pull strings. So I mean, the fact of how that got turned on is a mystery. So why it was turned on? Maybe it was from me visiting one of those graves that haven't been visited in a while. Maybe they just like that. Do I want to say attention to kind of like maybe try to reach out more to communicate by saying like, hey, just because they want to maybe talk, they want to share their story or something. I guess it's the way I was trying to look at it, or just being acknowledged would probably be the proper term. But yeah, that was my little weird incident that has happened.
Oh, that's really fascinating, and I really like your take on that too. I think oftentimes when people are in a cemetery or after they visit a cemetery, if something strange happens or something that they can't explain, I think a lot of that, and this is based on my own experience of going in and out of burial grounds for probably at least 40 years. um, I think there definitely is a sense of acknowledgement that you've stopped at someone's grave, whether or not you're related to them, I don't even think matters, that in your own way, their story is being told. And like I said, they're being remembered. So whether or not that energy follows you, stays with you, I think that sometimes is a thing. And I don't think it's necessarily anything to be afraid of. And I know sometimes people are very afraid of cemeteries because it causes us to think about our own mortality. And I've been doing tours for over 25 years, and sometimes even though people know we're going to a cemetery, they'll be like, no, I'll stand out here, I'll stand on the other side of the wall, I can hear you, or I'll stand at the gate, and I'm like, there's nothing, really nothing to be afraid of. Think of just how amazing it is to see someone's grave and just to think about them for even just a moment, or to contemplate the carving that's on their stone. I think it's just and I don't know, maybe it's just me. I was adopted, so I don't know who any of my family is or relatives are in that sense, and I've done ancestry and all of that. I've always been fascinated with that, and if these people still have descendants around and what their lives were like. And yeah, sometimes, yeah, it can be spooky. I'm not saying I haven't gotten spooked in a cemetery. I definitely have, but I think it's just it's just an interesting way to connect with the community, to connect with the past, to connect with even your own thoughts on death and what you want when it's your turn. Again, going back to the memento mori, how do you want to be remembered? I'm not trying to take this into a dark, scary place, but in many of these cases, particularly these people, that's how we know them, is through their gravestone. I mean, we're lucky in New England because we still have a lot of historic homes with people's names on them. I mean, I grew up, right down the street from Old Deerfield Village. Right now, I'm just down the road from Strawberry Bank. Great living history museums with fabulous old homes. But where are the people? They're in the burying ground. So I don't know. I don't know if I overthink it too much, but I think that's a lot of what I try to express in my storytelling and my writing.
That makes sense. Uh, yeah, I'll touch on something else too. Like, um, that I started to do like a while ago. Like when I started doing like my investigation, um, I, it's everybody. It's almost like that default question, right? Like, hey, what's your name? Who am I talking to? That way, we always know who we're talking to, so we can address the spirit by their name. And anyway, so when I get names, I might not look right away of the cemetery that I'm at or graveyard, depending on where I am. But uh, like for an example for this take here is one of my favorite stories that I like to share is from July 15th, 2012, and it was the first time I got my own spirit box, and I wanted, and I it's a new toy to me, so of course I wanted to go and play with it. Basically, I wanted to get the feel of it, everything, and we got a name through the spirit box. It was Ralph, and at that particular moment, we didn't really get any other responses by this Ralph. We just got Ralph, and we got a couple more uh, responses that night, but we weren't there that long, so we didn't gradually like walk around to see if there was in fact a Ralph buried there. Now, fast forward a week later, which would have been July 21st of or 22nd or something like that, whatever 7 days did from 15. Anyway, the point is that so I was with a few other people, and this time we were actually looking to see if we could find a Ralph in the same cemetery. We came across a grave that actually said Ralph on it. So of course I got my camcorder out and stuff like that, was recording because I wanted to document it and show proof like there's in fact a Ralph buried here. But in the video I also put that clip back in, basically saying like, hey, did I find the right Ralph that contacted us? Basically asking the person that's watching, like, is this maybe the same Ralph that we contacted like a week prior? But I always found that fascinating. And the reason why I bring this up, this particular story, is every time I'm in the area now with that specific cemetery, I will go and stop and pay a visit to Ralph's grave. Just to say hi and just to acknowledge that I still remember him reaching out from that time. And I do try to see if I could collect more evidence. I did try a spirit box again, a voice recorder. I've gotten more of EMF spikes around his area more recording. But I mean, it's still something. Is he still around? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, maybe it's somebody else. It could very well be his wife for all I know. Margaret, I think is the wife's name. But that's just who I am. I just want to pay the respect of whomever reaches out. Another story I just want to share, Roxy, if you don't mind, is especially with the viewer, the listener, viewer, wherever you guys are listening to this, is so that's just one example. This is another example of why I think it's important to always ask for a name too, especially when it comes to if you do want to go and visit and try to pay respect. There's another cemetery that we went, which is not too far from where we captured Ralph. Um, However, this one we never got a name, but we know for a fact it was a female voice on the recorder. They were very curious of the voice recorder, probably because they'd never seen one before. For all I know, I don't even think anybody really did like a paranormal investigation there, so they probably didn't know what a camcorder is or voice recorder, depending on the year that they passed away, per se. And anyway, no matter how many times I tried to ask for a name, I never could get a name. So that kind of basically said when I go to the cemetery to try to pay my respect, I'm not really looking for a grave because I don't know what grave to find. But I'm always, I guess you could just say talk it out loud, and to say like, hey, I hope you're still here. You know, I remember you reaching out to me. Hopefully, you remember me and stuff like that. So, I don't know if there's any type of other way, Roxy, that you would suggest from maybe your experience.
Well, I appreciate you sharing those experiences. I mean, it's really something when you almost, I know it's going to sound kind of strange maybe to some people, but you almost like establish just a momentary friendship with the person that is there. And, as far as some of the things that I do, and I don't do it all the time, but every once in a while, if I'm going to a burying ground for the first time, and I remember I was really getting into this when I was writing my Massachusetts Book of the Dead, and I know I did this a lot in Vermont too, is my method of communicating is I use dowsing rods. So I have copper dowsing rods, and sometimes immediately, again, if it's a new burial ground to me, I'll get out of the car, I'll grab my rods, and I'll ask the rods, which grave do I need to go visit first? And I'll allow the rods to guide me, because rods don't just answer yes or no. They can give you direction and help you find things and things like that. So I'll ask the rods, who do I need to visit first? And, I just picture myself grounded. I'm always very, very respectful. And I'll let the rods lead me to where I need to go. And it's always interesting when you end up at a stone. Again, sometimes you're not planning on going to that one. You're there for another reason. And you stand there and you sort of connect just for a moment, and connecting, just reading the stone and, contemplating this person's existence. And maybe their family is buried nearby and you're seeing the graves of children around them, or, you're recognizing that name from the street that you just passed, just happened to be the person's name. And you make that connection for a moment, again, sort of bringing them back to life. And sometimes I'll ask a few questions with my dowsing rods. And then sometimes I'll even go so far, if I really feel like, if I'm feeling the energy or I'm feeling a connection, like I said, like you're almost like talking to a friend for a minute, I'll sometimes ask, do you want me to tell your story? And I'll let the rods sort of answer that for me. And then, if it's something where, it's a yes, and I'll be like, all right, so I'm going to go back, I'm going to, research the story, see if there's anything that I need to tell, or, I mean, there's always something to tell, but anything that I really feel very strongly about that, comes across when I go back and look at the story a little bit deeper. So I think that's always one of the ways that I really like to connect. And I know when I'm writing, it's so hard to just describe the process, because again, it sounds kind of strange. But when I'm writing, I write all my books by hand, and I write them in notebooks, longhand. I'm old school. That's how I grew up, is writing everything down. And then afterwards, I'll go ahead and type it into the computer. But while I'm writing, it's usually a very quiet process. I light a candle, and my intention is everybody that I'm writing about, all the cemeteries, all the people, is that they're standing right behind me. And sometimes I get that sense. Again, it's going to sound kind of crazy, maybe not you. I sometimes get a sense that they're there and they're right with me as I write their name down, as I look at the photographs, because I photograph everything. I have tens of thousands of pictures, and I'll just review my visit to that burying ground and what it was like that day, what the weather was like, what it smelled like, what it was like standing at their grave. And in that moment, again, I'm right back there with them. And I just, I make good on, if I say I'm going to tell your story, I will tell your story, whether it's in a book, whether it's a story that I share with someone, whether it's a story on my tour, whether it's at an event. And those are the unforgettable moments. And those are also the moments when I feel like I'm doing the right thing. Again, it sounds kind of strange, but I feel like I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm doing what I set out to do. I'm finding a lot of meaning in that. So sometimes it's starting out with a dowsing rod. Sometimes it's just a sense. Sometimes it's just, a promise I make in a graveyard that, what, if I don't come back, people will know about you.
Right. That's a good, yeah, that's awesome. That's what I've been trying to do. That's why I like the name aspect too sometimes, if I can get them, because for somebody like me, you just described using dowsing rod. I have been curious on how to learn that and how to know how, the simple basics. I guess is what I'm trying to say, is and the stuff like that, because I know depending on the person, you can kind of have your yes and no different than others. I think is how I was reading it, but I guess to this point is like you just brought up another good example that I want to share too, with a couple people that I have now recently found, or sort of. Um, I can think a TV show for one of the names, but it got me curious on finding out more. But so for the purpose of this, I'll just say the TV show for this name that I originally got it from or heard about was Kindred Spirits. They came here to Vermont for a episode that was in Bristol, and they were at the Briggs Hill Cemetery. And during their process of trying to figure out their research for who was there and this and that, so they could move forward of the case that they were doing, they ended up stumbling upon a name by the name Dora E. Cushman. She was about 15 years old, who died from an abortion attempt. And so that kind of always stuck with me, because Kindred Spirit went into it a little bit, but they didn't go fully into it. So anyway, during that attempt, I always remembered that name. I did have to have a friend rewatch that episode for me again, just so I could remember the name of the cemetery, or in the person, at least spelling wise, I think it was. But to this point, though, I looked up old newspapers that I could find, and I started to dig into, as you would put it, Roxy, the story. What is her story? Well, her story is pretty sad. Yeah, she was 15. She went to this dude, Smith Davis, I believe was the name, and he suggested to Dora to have this abortion take place, which he had the specific, I guess, instrument or so, but something went wrong and she died. Now, what makes this more weird is after she had died, Smith Davis took off, fled. And so if that sounds weird and suspicious, it should. So anyway, they caught this guy somewhere in Rutland as he bought a ticket to go to somewhere in New Hampshire. And long story short, he did go to court, and he did plead um, guilty, but it wasn't guilty for her death. It was guilty for the instrument that he had that was not familiar to the town or something like that. So he was not. He kind of was off the hook from her death, I guess. Like the way I read it is more of he was just guilty because of the unique instrument that he had that just weren't familiar with the town or something like that. So and then afterward, as you read it, which kind of ends is basically you're reading that the Smith Davis also started to get a what's the word I'm looking for? Almost like a petition to be forgiven from the town, to be forgiven for the crime, basically. And from there, I'm not sure if the petition ever got him to be free or what, but I know he was supposed to be serving anywhere between 3 to 5 years because of it. But I don't know if he ever did because the newspapers kind of stopped after mentioning about this petition that was going around. Um, there's another one that I'll just share real quick, where you mentioned, like, you kind of go there for one thing to a cemetery, but then all of a sudden you're going to this other grave that's there without even realizing, or that you didn't really plan on. So we went to another cemetery that you actually mentioned in your book, Vermont Book of the Dead, which is the window with a grave, Tiffany Clark Smith. And so we were there because the guy that I was with that day, he'd never seen the window with a grave, the grave with the window. And so I just wanted him to see it. But as we were there, he had this ghost app that I'm not really. I'll state it for the people too that may not have read my article about this particular person. But when it comes to ghost app, it's very hard for me to believe that they're actually real. They're not like AI generated or something, especially now with AI taking over everything. But anyway, that's a whole different topic. Anyway, we were just kind of minding our own business, but his device started to send off or go off with weird responses, I guess I'll say, for lack of. And all of a sudden it started to shout off like names and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden it was like, "Am I dead? Where are you? Can you see me?" And stuff like that. And I was just like, "What is going on here?" So afterward, we went back and kind of read some of the names that it went off, and either or anything that was weird in this particular um, theory, I guess, with this app. A couple things that kind of stuck out was table. Now, you might not think in a cemetery you're going to find a table, but if you really look at it in the way that this Evergreen Cemetery in New Haven has, you could almost say that this particular gravestone was set up in a way as if it was, in fact, a table. So I took a picture of this just to show, like this is interesting. Like it said table, and then it's like, does it mean like this grave that almost acts like a table, like it looks like a table? Because that's interesting. What was another one, real quick, that I can share? It said like blacksmith. That was odd. But then it didn't become odd when we found an anvil for that, like a blacksmith would use. That was, what are we like on? It was like a Rocky might be able to help me out better, but it was almost like the symbol. I guess the the symbol, I guess, on top of the almost like the icon of on top of the stone, I guess. I don't know if that's right, but basically, like, that was interesting. Blacksmith, this anvil here that's on this grave, that's technically a blacksmith. So anyway, we get some names where it was like Ann, ANN. The other one was like uh, another woman's name that I'm brain farting. Oh my god, why am I brain farting this? Like Teresa or something like that. God, it's brain farting me already. But anyway, it got to the point where we couldn't find the grave, so we couldn't figure out if this person was actually buried here or whatever. Uh, 24 hours, or about 24 hours later, we ended up discovering that yes, there was in fact like this woman's name that I'm now brain farting on was, in fact, there is one buried there, and then stuff like that. So 24 hours later, not only did we find the name, but we found like a find a grave picture. So that picture helped me and my lady when we went back to try to look for it, find it, find the grave. And then it was more like, okay, so what's this story? And then more I started to dig into this of who these people were, it started to make sense with some of the responses that we had gotten previously with that dude with his ghost app. So what I sort of uncovered here, which was interesting enough too, was she died like January 19th of 1952, I believe. And she also died at the age of 19, January 19th, age 19, interesting enough. Um, anyway, when it came down to her death certificate, none can be found. So, so the only conclusion I can get of this is, am I, with the response where it said, am I dead? It's almost like, do they not know they died? And then if so, like, do they not know how they died? Because if I can't find a death certificate that would explain, that's interesting. Because so I found out she was married to Jacobs, and I looked up the husband's name. Come to find out, he died at the age of 26, a few years later after she had died. But he died from tuberculosis, TB, consumption, basically. So I don't want to say I'm wondering like about that. This is certain, maybe, but I mean, could his wife prior have died from consumption, and then it just took a little bit more for maybe just Jacob to get it, to contract it, because we all know these consumption stories as well, which they're not pretty when it comes to the quote vampire legend. But I just find it fascinating that I can find the husband's certificate of death, but I cannot find her.
And it sounds like there's a bit of a mystery there, but I mean, the fact that you decided to take it up and look into it a little bit more is really awesome. Sometimes we do reach a literal dead end in some of these stories. That's why I think one of the best things that I have in my arsenal is my subscription to newspapers.com. Every time that comes up for renewal, I'm like, yes, please renew it. Because you can really spend some time trying to piece these stories together. And that's what I do with some of the stories that are a little bit more remote, or ones that I'm like, all right, like you know, there's going to be something more, something's just sending me in this direction. Interesting. There's probably, you know, more to that story that we might be able to find out.
Right. And that's why I've been trying to dig up anything else, but I keep reading to, dead ends. I even tried asking like the Vermont Historical Society to see if maybe they might have something in their record that I might not be able to see or something. And just to confirm, I did find the lady's name. It was Teresa. Um, oh man, I'm probably gonna butcher her last name. And no, I don't know if I want to try it. Sturdivant, Sturvers,
Sturdivant.
Sturvant. Yes, thank you.
Yep, Sturdivant.
Sturvant. Yes. Okay, so the D and the E is almost like silent. Got it. Okay, good to know. Thank you for that. Yeah, so Teresa Sturvant. Yeah, so I will post that into the description below for people that would like to see that, but read about it as well. But yeah, I just thought that's the type of thing that just fascinates me. I think as I grow older, I mean, as much as I like the fabricated stories, but I'm actually liking the ones that actually have the evidence or some sort of proof that backs up the tale or the person per se. In this case, I can definitely say that Teresa Servant was in fact a real person, and just how she died, I have no idea. And I mean, I guess that's just a mystery of, like you were saying, of maybe one day we can unravel. Um, but yeah, it just fascinates me when I find this type of stuff. So, and that's what I think what makes me want to learn more of the people. Like in this case, the people's stories. As you would put, like, they want to tell their stories. And as you put it, like, if I don't come back, at least people will know about you. So that's the way I would like to do it as well.
Yeah, I think that it's really awesome to have that sort of mission. Again, who knows where Teresa's descendants are? They may still be around. If maybe they have similar questions, and that's always sort of the other side that being an author sometimes brings, or being a storyteller, a tour guide, or whatever I happen to be doing that day. You don't know on the other side who you might meet, and since the books have come out, I think the first one's going to be going on 20 years soon. I have people that reach out to me, whether it's via email or a phone call, or through my Facebook page, or even sometimes on a tour, and they'll say, I opened up the book and I found one of my ancestors in there, and they're like, I don't know what made you write about them, because it's not, again, it's not a famous story, it's not a big haunted story, a big haunted cemetery. But I have found, I mean, definitely I can, probably say at least 24 people from all these books that have gotten back to me to say, wait a minute, you were writing about my ancestor or somebody that I was connected with, and I couldn't believe I opened up the book and there they were. So sometimes it might be a case where it's all going to come together a little bit further down the line, where, maybe today you don't have Teresa's full story and you're going to continue to look into it. But even just by talking about her, putting the energy and that intention out there, again, you don't know who you're going to bump into that is related to that story. And that was also sort of part of the experience when I was writing about the cemetery in Grafton. I had been driving around, and I just couldn't find this dirt road cemetery, and it was raining, and I was driving by the same hotel, and they were probably like, who is this person? Are they lost? And I was like, all right, I'm gonna ask somebody's got to know. And the historical society was closed, but there was a man out front, and he was taking down the flag, and he was getting ready to go in. So I pulled over and I said, this is going to sound kind of crazy. I'm looking for this grave, and is there a way you can help me? And he's like, yeah, sure. Who are you looking for? And I said, I'm looking for Rebecca Park. And he's like, well, I'm a descendant of Rebecca Park's family. And I'm like, what? I'm like, are you kidding me? Are you, what? And I thought he was pulling my leg. There's no way. I'm like, there's no, and he told me exactly where to find it, gave me a little bit of information on the story. And I'm like, what are the odds that I happened to bump into this guy, and he opened up the museum for me, and he was again, so the people in Vermont have just always been so lovely when I've been writing this book. And I was like, what are the odds? I'm looking for her grave, and I bump into, a descended family member. I'm like, okay, it's New England. So, and I explained to him, I'm going to write about this in my book. And, this was quite some time ago. And he's like, great, that's awesome. I'm so glad you're going to include her. And I was just like, that was like a full circle moment. And the book wasn't even printed yet. And I was like, oh, this is amazing.
Mm. That just reminds me real quick of going back to me finding Ralph there. I actually just found a family member that may have been either an uncle or the son of a Ralph, because I just found out that there were two family members by the name Ralph. So I've been so when I was asking uh, the guy that I found that was basically, excuse me, basically related to this Ralph, I was just like, oh wow, like that's so cool. And I was like, I hope you don't mind that I like, visit your family's grave and stuff like that, and like, do this like paranormal stuff around your family's grave. He's like, oh no, this is so cool. And I was just like, if you don't mind me asking, I was like, if I were to go back and ask Ralph, because again, I just don't know which Ralph was, you know, in contact with. I was just like, if I can figure out which Ralph it is, I was just like, is there like a nickname or some type of phrase or word that only you and Ralph would know? And he told me. So I basically now just need to find the time to go back and see if I can be in contact with this Ralph again and see if this is in fact uh, the dad or the uncle of this guy. So, and he did give me a word and a nickname to go by. So I thought that was so cool, and that the fact that I even have permission from him to go pay my respect. So I just find that so awesome, and I'm just glad, like, for something like this, in this case, like I can go back with somebody's permission.
That's fantastic. And, that also helps to give you the motivation to pull it all together too. You're like, all right, so this person knows I'm on this mission, so let me see it as far as I can take it.
Exactly, exactly. Because if I could find out which Ralph it is, then yeah, that'd be something. And
Hmm.
I know he said he wasn't that close with his uncle, but with his dad, like, yeah, I mean, it's the fact that he gave me some keyword to go by, like that will totally help.
That's
Uh,
fantastic.
yeah. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know why I always want to go back to visit Ralph. Maybe it was because he also, not only did he, that he reached out to us that night, but I think it's just because he's a veteran. Like my dad, who passed away, he was a veteran for like the Vietnam
Hmm.
War and stuff. So I mean, I think because of my dad with his war stories and stuff, and how, as I was going through school learning how the soldiers in Vietnam were treated coming back and this and that, and hearing my dad's stories, I think, like, when it comes to certain veterans, I would say, especially around the Vietnam era, like, I at the time, I was little and didn't really fully understand until now. I like, now, like, I understand of like the difficulty they had coming back. It's almost like, like I almost like oh God, what's the good word to put it? I don't want to say envy, but like it's almost like I know what they went through, and I, even though I can't relate to it, but I always say like, hey, like my dad was in Vietnam and he came back and he didn't have the greatest time. So it's almost like a way of connecting that way to basically say like, hey, you may not have had it easy coming back either.
Absolutely. And, that perspective and bringing that whole story together is, it has such a value to it. It really does.
I appreciate that. Yeah, my dad passed away September 16th of 2003. So yeah, it's been 22 years almost. So yeah, it's. I mean, I always think I always like to say my dad is watching over me. I think there's been some time where I think he has tried to reach out to me, and stuff like that. But like, um, I just know it's just some. I don't know what it is sometimes, Roxy, but like it, it seems harder to go visit your actual family member than it is a complete stranger. Does that make any sense?
It does. It does.
Yeah. But anyway, One thing I just want to bring in too before we go on to the next thing is in your book, Vermont, Book of the Dead, you 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 put in a very awesome, dare I say, cemetery, and it's the Ben and Jerry's Graveyard Flavor one. I love that place. And I think I don't know. I didn't get a chance to fully read that section of yours, but I think it's so funny that this you could look at it in a way of they say like if you see a cemetery or a graveyard with a fence around it, usually that sort of means like they're trying to keep something in. Well, in this case, if we go to Ben and Jerry's cemetery, even though there's a fence there, Roxy, can we say sometimes they just get out because they resurrect sometimes.
They do, and this truly unique graveyard is, it's one of a kind. And I think if we were going to pick cemeteries in Vermont that get the most laughs, it would definitely be the Ben and Jerry's Flavor Graveyard in Waterbury. I mean, it's so cool. And again, that is to me when I say the character and characters and the people of Vermont. I would not expect this in any other place than Vermont. It's awesome. The gravestones, which look like old New England gravestones, which is so cool. And the puns. I am a punstress. I love puns so much. I can't read one of the gravestones without laughing myself silly. And everybody has a connection, I think, to ice cream in one way or another. And the fact that when you walk around it, it's sort of this resurrection of these old flavors from Ben and Jerry's is just hilarious.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I've been there like twice, but it's just so awesome to see it and read it, especially the flavors that came back to life. So,
resurrected from the grave. I just love it.
Exactly. I think they say basically a flavor gets resurrected if you vote there's enough votes for it to come back. Otherwise, it stays dead. I think is how they put it, which is awesome.
You are correct. They have a place on the Ben and Jerry's website for you to put your vote in for resurrection. If not, they are dead.
So awesome. So on that note, Roxy, so to sort of start wrapping things up, I know we talked a little bit about like how you go into places and stuff, and you have done like the New England Curiosity. So after all these years, and even just doing like your ghost tours and your shop and stuff, I guess from when you started to now, maybe if your opinion had changed, like I guess how would you look at the supernatural universe?
I mean, I've always been a believer since I was a kid in the supernatural. I grew up watching shows like In Search of, and all of that stuff back in the day, and I've always found it very intriguing. I think one of the things that I've learned just throughout, a lot of the interactions that I've had with people, because I see people all the time at, talks and tours, is even though you might not realize it or know it, more people are certainly more curious about this stuff. However, more people are having more experiences than I think the average person realizes. I'm just very, very lucky to be able to hear those stories from people, because people have a comfort level, because not that I hang out in cemeteries, but I kind of do, and hang out in libraries and things like that. Always researching. I think people have a comfort level, and that's what they've said to me is, I can tell you, but I can't tell somebody else, or, You're not going to think I'm crazy when I tell you this experience I've had. So if you feel strange about an experience that you've had, or if you're questioning, a spirit encounter that you might have had, let me please be the first one to tell you, and something that I've learned in, over 30 years of doing what I do. Not everybody talks about it, but there is a lot of stuff going on out there. There's a lot of interactions with spirit. There are more people from all different kinds of backgrounds, all different walks of life, all different religious beliefs that have had experiences with ghosts, spirits, paranormal, whatever you want to call it. So don't feel like you're weird. I don't think it's anything to be afraid of. One of the things that I've also learned on that same note is that sometimes, yes, it can be startling when we have an encounter. A lot of the times because we're not expecting it and it can catch us off guard. It isn't always bad, and we all have our own team of guides, guardians, and ancestors that are around us too, which is a whole nother conversation for a whole nother day. So if you're having an experience, know that sometimes it can be truly comforting to know that someone is looking in on you. You could be having an experience like we were talking about earlier, where, you're connecting with someone that's passed that you don't even realize you're connecting with, but you might be bringing them back to life or recalling their memory or recalling their story. And that's, again, that brief connection that you're having where maybe, like you said, the light's going on at home. That could be their way of saying thank you. Don't feel isolated. Don't feel alone. Don't be afraid. Because I can tell you, just on the street that I live on, I've managed to talk to a lot of people, and everybody's got something in your neighborhood, whether you know it or not. So I think that's one of the things that I've learned over the years, that it's more common than you think.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, especially with all these old houses, before the modern ones, anyway. But yeah, they're always carrying something. Whether it's the energy left behind the original wood, or maybe some sort of artifact that might be buried that hasn't been uncovered yet, or maybe something else. I mean, that is why the spirit of the person is still there, because well, half the time, sometimes, they still think it's their house in a way. So yes, at first it might seem startling if it seems uh like it's noisy, I guess, for lack of better wording. But maybe because, it's like in the modern day now, like if I break into Roxie's house, just for the example here, people, please don't do that. But like if I were to break into Roxie's house, she's gonna think, like I'm basically there as a robber per se, or thief. Whereas in this case, a whole family that moved in, let's just say Roxy moved into her house, and now the spirits think that Roxy is trespassing because they think it's still their house. I know that should make sense to Roxy, but let's hope that makes sense to everybody else.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we don't even realize, what the history of a site is, or even just how open we are sometimes. I think some of the stories that I've heard from people that, that say they've always been sensitive and spirits are drawn to them as well. You could be one of those people that spirits feel comfortable also being around as well. So, for as many different types of people that we have in the world today that are walking around with us, you have the same thing on the other side. You've got, people that had good outlooks on life, bad outlooks on life, people who did great things in their life, and people who did not so great things in their life. So your spirit encounter can be with any number of those. But there's definitely a lot going on out there for sure.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. At time too, it's always good to make sure you are protected because you never know who or what you're going to be encountering that time too. So I'll just that might have to be another day of conversation as well. So
Yes,
um,
protected and respected. I mean, particularly if, and I definitely want to add this to, particularly if you're someone and you're into, the paranormal and, contacting spirits on the other side. I cannot stress enough to be respectful. Be respectful when you're in these cemeteries, when you're in, someone's home or property or what have you. It is vital to be respectful. These were people, going in a place and rattling the cage and saying, all right, we're going to move this spirit on. That necessarily might not be what needs to be done. So definitely, absolutely protect yourself. There's, negative energy and negative spirits out there as well. But take a moment to think about if, you're thinking about moving a spirit on for whatever reason. Picture that person standing there in front of you, not just their spirit. Would you be as quick to move them on? How much of their story do you know? So, there is that side to it as well. I've also been on a lot of investigations over the years. A lot of places I've been through and gone through, and I am always very, very careful when spirit comes through, because there's a lot of reasons why they do come through. So don't be quick to move them on. Try to understand their story first. I think you have the potential for learning a lot. And when I say you, I'm generalizing the you out there. There's a lot to learn. And I think, one final takeaway is if you could just take a moment to think about how amazing this all is. This whole world of paranormal, spirits, ghosts, whatever you want to call it, to think that there is something more than this earth walk, than this life that we live, and particularly, the spirits that are around us that come back because they love us, that there is something beyond. You could not convince me that there is not anything on the other side. And I think that is one of the things that, when I go, when I go from this earth, that, will be in my heart, that I know that there is something more that's out there.
I completely agree with what you just said, and if I can add to uh like you were saying, with moving spirits on, I think it's better to also add, like, not only do you get to know the story, but you talk about the story to get it out there. Some of the people that just want their stories shared, they will move on themselves when they know that their story is being told. Because maybe that's all they want before they move on. They just want that clarity, that like acknowledgement, as we were talking earlier. I think that's all they want, and then sometimes you do hear that they have moved on after that.
100%. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And other than that, I guess, Roxy, will end it with the final question of the night, which is, what can we expect from Roxy in 2025?
Well, it's never a dull moment at New England Curiosities. So I am working on my 11th book, which is the Connecticut Book of the Dead. I actually had somebody in the store the other day, and they're looking at all of my titles, and they were like, "So I don't see a Connecticut," and I'm like, "Well, I'm working on Connecticut. I'm actually going to be going down to Connecticut in a couple of weeks to do one or two last research trips. So that's something I'm going to start working on this winter. Hopefully, it will be out next year. Then I got to do the Rhode Island Book of the Dead to finish up the whole series. Right now I have my 6,000 square foot store at the mall at Fox Run in Newington, New Hampshire, which is an immersive environment. A lot of what I have on display is old pictures and photographs of the cemeteries that I've gone to, in addition to the ones that are in the books that I've used for research. So I want people to understand, sort of the process of what it is to write a book, and I encourage people to get out there and research and explore their burying grounds to help preserve the gravestones, get involved with your historical society. That's something that I'm always talking about. I'm always going to libraries and historical societies, talking to people to get involved locally to save various, institutions that need to be saved. Finally, for 2025, aside from the regular tours that I do, we're actually doing haunted boat tours out to the Wood Island Life Saving Station in Kittery that had been abandoned for 60 years. And they fully restored the property, which is really incredible. This was a place where, before we had the Coast Guard, men would go out in rowboats and save mariners in distress, not on sunny days, but at the height of severe New England storms. And they managed to bring this building back literally from the dead. They found 2 skeletons on the island from the 1800s. So I've been doing tours for them to help benefit the Wood Island Life Saving Station and their future, and being able to tell those stories. And then I guess I should have said two things. The last thing is we actually have partnered with an organization called Scare New Hampshire that collects Halloween costumes for kids that maybe their families can't afford costumes, or there's some sort of financial challenge at home. So we are collecting those at our store, and then in October they will be distributing them throughout the state of New Hampshire to families that are in need. I grew up as a family in need back in the day, so again, it's very important for me and for No Living Curiosities to give back to the communities by supporting all of these organizations that are out there doing wonderful things. And those are a couple that we're very involved with this year.
Well, that's awesome, Roxie. I can't wait to see what other project you have up your sleeve in the future as well that hadn't been mentioned yet, but maybe manifestation. Oh my God. Manifesting. There we go. There's the word.
You got it.
I don't know why I wanted to say manifestation, that one, but manifesting. Yeah. Anyway, I guess it's just been one of those days. But Roxie, again, I thank you for your time. For everybody else, yes, please check out Roxie's work, especially if you'd like to take a look at the Vermont Book of the Dead. Like I was saying, I kind of look at it now almost like a travel guide, because there is some fascinating gravestones in here that I definitely want to go check out myself. So, and I know there was like a couple grave I didn't mention, but maybe that could be another talk with Roxie if she doesn't mind in the future.
Sounds great.
All right. Well, for everybody else, thank you for listening. And like always, people, keep your eyes open, because you just never know if an apparition will appear in front of you.